Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Candidate Forum for the United States Congress, California District 1. My name is Janice Bedane, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Western Nevada County. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Western Nevada County and Nevada County Media, with collaboration from the League of Women Voters of Butte County and the Redding area, and help from the League of Women Voters in Placer and Plumas counties. I'd like to thank the candidates for participating in tonight's forum, incumbent Representative Doug LaMalfa and challenger Audrey Denney. We are in a very large studio. There is no audience, and we are well socially distanced. Everybody off camera is wearing masks. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization whose mission is to promote political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. The League does not support or oppose political candidates or parties, but will take positions on political issues after careful study. Questions for tonight's forum have been submitted in advance by constituents throughout District 1, which includes all or part of 11 counties. These have been reviewed by the League of Women Voters to avoid personal and inappropriate questions, redundancies, and questions that are off topic. Some questions have been combined for time and scope. We received many more questions than time will allow, and we prioritize them by the number of questions received on any one topic. With that, I'm going to introduce you to tonight's moderator, Jennifer Granger, who will review the format and begin the questioning.
The format for tonight's forum is as follows. Each candidate will make a 2-minute opening statement. Each question will be answered by both candidates. They each have 2 minutes to answer the question, and there are no rebuttals. Each candidate will then have 3 minutes for closing statements, and the order is determined alphabetically. So tonight we're going to start with Ms. Denney first for opening, followed by Congressman LaMalfa. And then we'll start in the questions. Okay, candidates have the floor from when they start speaking until their 2 minutes is up, with no interruptions from the other candidate. I will raise a card when Janice Bedane will raise a card when 30 seconds is left to speak, and then raise a time's up card to indicate that it is time to wrap up your comments. You may finish your sentence after time's up, but no run-on or compound sentences at that point, please. Your cooperation will help us get through as many questions as possible. Okay, so now we're going to start with our opening. So Ms. Denney, you have 2 minutes.
Well, it's a lot of change has happened since the last time I had the chance to be with the congressman and talk about issues in a setting like this. A lot in our district and a lot in our world, and honestly not for the better, right? We've had devastating wildfires that have taken lives and homes and livelihoods. We're experiencing a global pandemic taking the lives of our community members and family members. And our economy is significantly worse off than it was in 2018. Unemployment has doubled. And unfortunately, our congressman hasn't been able to make significant progress on these issues. Since we sent him back to DC for his 4th term, he voted against HR 968 that would have protected people with pre-existing conditions. He voted against HR 3, which would have decreased prescription drug costs. He voted against HR 1, which would have strengthened ethics rules for members of Congress. He voted against S57, which is a wildly bipartisan public lands funding bill, when 50% of our district is in public lands. The congressman has built a successful farm, and I've heard he's a good farmer. Unfortunately, he's not a good representative. And it's time we have a representative that is not bought and paid for by corporate and special interests, and will only work for the people that she's sworn an oath to represent. We need somebody who will stand up to both Democrats and Republicans when they're wrong. And my ask for you is simple. Trust me with your vote, send me to DC, and if you don't like the work I do in 2 years, then fire me. That's what this office should be. I'm proud that my campaign for the last 3 years has been run with authenticity and truth and integrity. And to that end, later this week, we'll be posting on our website a document that timestamps and fact checks everything that I say tonight. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Let's have some fun.
Thank you, Ms. Denney. Congressman LaMalfa?
Well, good evening. Thank you for putting this on and for having me here tonight. I'm pleased to be able to take part and talk about the truth of my record and what we've tried to accomplish this last 2 years. So as you know, 2 days after the last election, we had a crisis, a disaster of unparalleled proportions in Northern California with what's known as the Camp Fire, the loss of so much in Paradise, Magalia, Concal, Yankee Hill, and surrounding areas there. So the good result of the election for me was soon lost in the idea that we have a lot to do. We have a lot to dig down and help our constituents in this district. Of course, that was preceded only a few months before by the Carr Fire in Redding, which not quite the magnitude of the Camp Fire, still very devastating for many people, and the loss of homes that were so big a part of the Carr Fire as well. So what did we do? We got right to work. We worked with the administration, we worked with the locals, we worked with everybody to try and put people back on a better track of not being in a disaster situation. So we were able to get FEMA working with Cal OES, working together, which doesn't often happen with the state and the federal government working so well together, harmonized this process to be responsive to the people's needs. We were able to get many, many millions of dollars in place to help with these crises. This also on the heels of the spillway disaster we had up at Oroville. Thankfully, it did not result in the loss of life, but indeed, we've had a lot affect us in Northern California. And so our work, our relationship with the White House and with the federal government has been very important to secure needed funding and needed streamlining in order to get this work done, whether it was a spillway and the disaster that could have been, keeping things going in the river there properly, the Carr Fire, the Camp Fire, and now dealing with COVID and the problems that has presented towards keeping business open, et cetera. So I'm proud of this record.
Thank you, Congressman. Okay, so now we turn our attention to the first question, and Congressman LaMalfa, you go first. We had several questions submitted regarding wildfire and forest management, so we're going to start off with a couple, 3 questions there. Okay, so the first question, wildfires of increasing size and intensity and longer wildfire seasons threaten communities throughout the 1st Congressional District. What are your views on the causes of increasing wildfire risk, and what is your plan for reducing that risk? Please specify the solutions that you think will be effective.
Okay, thank you. Well, what it will take is a dramatic increase in the pace of scale of management of our forests and our wild lands where these fuels are building up. Excuse me. And so we've had great difficulty getting past some of the environmental process and the reviews. NEPA is very difficult, and California CEQA is very difficult. Indeed, in a salvage operation over on the coastal area, after 2 years of wrangling to do a simple cleanup along roadways, an environmental group came in and put the stop to that in court. So what do we have to do? We have to acknowledge the conditions we have. We have overcrowded forests, overcrowded with trees, brush, and this material needs to be removed and done something positive with, whether it can be turned into a byproduct, or my big thing is we need to move much more strongly forward with biomass being used to produce electricity. It's not going to be cheap, but then neither is solar and wind. And this will help meet the mandate that California has for renewable power, but put the jobs in our backyard, put the cleanup in our backyard of these areas so they're not so fire prone and dangerous, which is terrible for the habitat. The area around Lake Oroville right now, I got to see pictures here recently finally of the whole aerial view. The amount of material that's going to go down into that lake from the ash, from the silt, it's going to be very, very detrimental to the water quality, which so much of the state relies on Lake Oroville with 3.5 million acre feet, and similarly with Shasta Lake and the fires that affect up there. So we have to increase the pace of scale. So whether this is contained within the scope of The climate change argument that I know is coming, you know, I'm not here to debate what percentage is human caused or what is nature caused, but the idea that we need to get to work and do this. What are we going to do about the effects of it? We need to store more water, we need to do more forest management, and we need to put people back to work here locally to get on top of that, instead of more schemes to use climate change as a way to tax people and give more money to things like the boondoggle known as high-speed rail. That seems to be the solution coming from the left.
Thank you. Ms. Denney.
I'm so glad that this is the first question brought up because honestly, it's the most important thing that we have to face in our district right now. And I don't know about you, but I am pretty sick and tired of watching the news and hearing Democrats just say that it's climate change and Republicans just say that it's vegetation management and streamlining environmental regulations. All of those things are true, right? And we're seeing them come up into our part of the world, Republicans and Democrats, and use our devastation as photo ops, right? A lot of the things that Congressman LaMalfa said, I completely agree with. It is about increasing the pace and scale of forest restoration, right? We desperately, desperately need to streamline environmental regulations so these projects can get done without an EIR that takes 2 years, right? We absolutely need to find ways to limit the frivolous suits that litigious extreme environmentalists bring that slow down our projects, right? But the fact of the matter is that the congressman has been in office for 8 years. And he recently tweeted that he has been asking Congress and the Forest Service for years to make this priority. He is Congress, right? We need forward-thinking, solutions-oriented leaders who will work across the aisle to get things done. We can start right now by implementing the Great American Outdoors Act that the president signed into law in August this year that has funding for a lot of these projects. But our congressman voted no on that. He's got a great proposal that he submitted to Congress to get some pilot projects in the western United States, but it barely scratches the surface of the 25 million acres that need to be treated in California so we don't keep losing lives and property. It's going to take collaboration with local, state, and fed agencies, Native American tribes. We need new technology. We need a lot of the timber market stuff he was talking about, biomass production, and I hope we get more questions because my time's up.
Okay. Okay, so we are going to get more questions.
Fantastic.
Ms. Denney, you go first. Most public land in District 1 is owned by the federal government. Specifically, what policies are you willing to pursue at the federal level concerning forest management on federal lands?
Fantastic. Exactly right. 50% of the land mass in our district is public lands. 41% is federal forests, right? Out of the state of California, 57% of our land is federal forests. It's going to take cooperation across all agencies. Here's one thing that it could look like. Enhancing and promoting the use of stewardship contracts across all of our 13 federal forests in our district. Stewardship contracting process is already in federal law. It's an item in the Farm Bill, and it brings to the table all the stakeholders. Federal government, state government, local government, Native American tribes, environmental groups, loggers, private industry, all come to the table and make an integrated natural resource management plan for a certain sector of forest. And then the private guys get to go in and implement the plan, right? So they pull out the marketable timber that has been selected to be selectively logged, but the trick is they also have to pull out the unmarketable timber, right? So they can sell off that timber to pay for their work. However, as many of you probably know, the domestic timber industry is completely saturated. Prices have fallen from 1996, 1,000 foot of ponderosa pine was $600, and you're getting $325 for that now. These log trucks that you're seeing driving up and down, they're getting $75 worth of profit off that. We absolutely need to boost the timber market. Biofuels that he mentioned, great way to do that. Other ways we can do it are finding export markets, increasing new things that we can develop out of wood, like wood pellets. We're having an incredible market in China right now for our wood pellets, cross-laminated timber. We need to invest in research and innovation to get these practices in our part of the world so we can have a timber market to get the woody biomass into. so the dollars and cents pencil out.
Thank you. Congressman LaMalfa?
Could you restate that?
Yes. Most public land in District 1 is owned by the federal government. Specifically, what policies are you willing to pursue at the federal level concerning forest management on federal lands?
Yeah, thank you. I've been pursuing that, and we could have more success if we had more bipartisan effort in accomplishing that. You know, you can't do it all by yourself. So if you go backwards a little bit, the Northwest Forest Plan put in place during the Clinton era has been a very difficult one to overcome to do the type of management that we need. If we go back to the previous era where our forests were maintained by personnel that saw them as multi-use, multi-purpose lands, we'd be much better off. You see forest closures, road closures, closed off to the type of management that we need, even to just hunting, hiking, off-roading. So we've lost a lot of control over that. It's been very difficult to overcome with the entrenched agencies in place. So that said, it's continuing to work on the pace and scale, what we're talking about. We need to put new plans in place that will increase the work to be done. Now, as far as legislation, I have bipartisan legislation with Senator Feinstein and my colleague from the Monterey area, Jimmy Panetta. It is very positive going forward. It's more on a demonstration level because we can't swing farther for the fences because these bills get shot down by environmental groups. We used to be able to get them through the House until the Pelosi team took over, and now it's that much more difficult to do. But we need to work on a bipartisan basis, and I'm grateful for being able to make incremental steps in the direction and show what we can be done. But kind of like a Tahoe project we went up and visited last year that showed on a 10,000 acre basis what can be done on thinning and management. This bill we're talking about with Senator Feinstein, Senator Daines of Montana, myself and Mr. Panetta, does this on 75,000 acre basis. Do we need to do it bigger and wider? Hey, I'm all in, but it's difficult to do. As far as the Great American Outdoors Act, half of that bill was a great bill by Rob Bishop from Utah that was going to speed up the work being done on maintaining our parks and our lands and put money towards that. The other half was requiring the federal government each year to buy nearly $1 billion of new land and put under its ownership when it can't manage what it has now.
Thank you. Okay, the next question goes to you first, Congressman. Given the increased wildfire risk, what policies and measures do you propose for helping constituents A, continue to obtain home and business insurance at an affordable price, and B, harden their structures and clear ladder fuels? Certainly.
We've gotten some good work done through the Farm Bill under USDA. USDA has a good measure and funding for rural development loans and grants. That helps with the kinds of things you mentioned there. Helping people with their homes, helping with the clearance around them. What we need to have is a much more focused effort on clearing around communities, to have fire breaks, to have the type of thinning. You know, you have the 100-foot setback. We might have to look a little more harder if that's going to work. But the type of building we put up, you know, the way the vents work in the eaves and in the areas along the ground, the material that you're building homes out of, we need to look harder at how that's going to be. I don't want to come and tell people how they do their homes like that, but we need to educate on that as well. So the other issues are that we're going to have to do some things that might be unpopular. And this is what it always boils down to quickly when we talk to the press, like, you know, urban media, we talk about doing this stuff. Oh, so that means you're going to clear cut. No, it doesn't mean we're going to clear cut everything from here to Oregon. It means we're going to manage and thin to a pace that is actually sustainable per acres, and in what areas known as the WUI, the wildland urban interface, do what's enough so that there's a defensible space around a town, around a neighborhood, that if a fire does approach, it gets knocked down and gives our firefighters a better fighting chance to beat that. You know, our wildland firefighters have been doing an amazing job this year. I have legislation to properly recognize them for that. Right now they're called forestry technicians. I don't even know what that means to half people, but so, you know, we honor their work, but we need to make their work easier, because the hundreds of thousands of acres that are still not even put out yet is a horrible thing for our air quality, water quality, habitat, the wildlife, and for the people that have to try and live near it. So all this is necessary, and I think we'll be successful with bipartisan legislation. I hope we can get done for them this year on the bill I'm talking about, Senator Feinstein, Daines, and my colleague, Mr. Panetta, who we worked well together on this stuff. So, you know, we'll get there.
Thank you. Ms. Denney.
I just want to first take an opportunity to commend the congressman on the proposed legislation he put forward for the actually getting to call wildland firefighters what they are. And I really hope that that comes with a boost of funding for Forest Service and an ability to appreciate that agency for what they do whilst striving to help them be better for all of us. So when we're talking about defensible space, I mean, I saw firsthand the difference it can make. I was up touring the Car Fire Scar around Whiskey Town, and one of my friends works for the Park Service, and they had obviously incredible defensible space around their house. Their next door neighbor was an elderly man, and he wasn't able to, so they went next door and helped him create defensible space, right? Because it also was going to save their home. And those two homes did not burn when everything else around them burned. And then he showed me example after example of places that there hadn't been defensible space and the devastation that comes from that. But guys, it's just true that people on limited incomes, elderly people who don't have mobility issues, you can't get them to get a weed whacker out and clear their space, right? And so we need to look at community block grants to help low-income individuals get the support that they need. I mean, it could even be like a conservation corps kind of project where we're putting young people to work doing that as part of potentially a career and technical education like internship program. In terms of the insurance commissioner and the insurance issues, that is such a crucial issue. And I have been badgering the insurance commissioner since the Camp Fire about fixing the issue that all of our insurance companies have decided to redline giant parts of our district, right? And we absolutely need to make sure that our state insurance commissioner is doing something. Also, we have federal flood insurance. Let's talk about federal fire insurance next.
Okay,
That was
thank
my
you. Ms. Denney, you go first on this question. What is your position on PG&E's use of public safety power shutdowns? During these PSPS events, we are left with no power and spotty cell service, making communication and evacuation notification difficult.
Yeah, it's 2020. And the fact that in the United States of America, we regularly have our power shut off is unacceptable, right? It's an inconvenience, yeah. I hate it when the state goes bad in my freezer, but more than that, the devastation it's doing to our local economies and our small businesses and the people who work there is outrageous. Folks, we need to hold PG&E accountable because forever, they will continue to use this as a low-cost insurance program, right? If there's a big fire, they have to pay a lot of money because they're liable. If they shut off, they don't miss very much profit, but also they've got this insurance, right? Absolutely critical that we hold them accountable. To do that, they need to be well-regulated because they've said it's going to take them 10 years to get the infrastructure in our part of the world into a safe place. In a February 7th article that the Union published, our congressman was quoted as wanting to lessen the regulations on PG&E. He said, quote, "They need more freedom to conduct their business for the ability to conduct their business and less regulation by the California Public Utilities Commission." That's what someone I would expect to say who receives thousands of dollars from PG&E PAC contributions. The PG&E PAC is made up of 90% money from executives, 95 of executives and board members. Politicians on both sides of the aisle, all over California, are bought and paid for by PG&E, and at the end of the day, I think that's the problem.
Thank you. Congresswoman LaMalfa?
Well, it's a deplorable situation that we are at a place in a supposedly the most advanced state in the country about having power shutoffs because the wind's blowing and because it's hot, even indeed today in some of our areas in Northern California. So I've taken action on that, again, a bipartisan legislation with Mr. Schrader from Oregon, to do the simple things. Why are there power shutoffs? Because of the threat of the wind blowing limbs and branches and trees into the power line, causing a strike, causing sparks, causing a fire to happen below. That's basically what happened up there in the Polga area and caused what we had with the Camp Fire. So What are we doing about that? What are we doing? So I passed legislation and succeeded in making it an easier process to clear around power lines. Now, well, you ask, Doug, why is that hard? Because they have to get permits on federal lands where so many miles of transmission lines are running through those areas. They have to get permits. And if the Forest Service or others are not issuing those permits timely, then who knows what's going to happen with the next wind. If the utilities involved, all of them we have here in Northern California or in the West, identify a hazardous tree or a series of hazardous trees, then they need to be able to get on them right now before you have a problem. Two bad things, power outages and fire are potential for that. And so I'm working on another bill to expand upon that zone because you still have not quite enough clearance where a tree would hit a wire. We need to expand on this and make it even better. So that said, we need to have our utilities focus on fire safety and not meeting even more mandates requiring us all to have 100% renewable, expensive power. That is what has taken some of our utilities' ability to do the other work they need to be doing and focusing on these other frivolous issues. So we need to have power that comes from our districts up here, hydropower, gas power, all these things that work 24/7.
Thank you. Okay. Congressman LaMalfa, you go first on this question. Do you believe climate change is presenting the first district with serious challenges? If so, what are they and what is your plan to address these challenges?
Well, we've had several years of drought, and California is kind of drought prone, as you would see through history. We have feast or famine on water and snowpack. You know, just a couple years ago, there was photographs of the snowpack, I think, over the Donner Pass. The snow was so high where it had been carved out by snowplows. It had looked like it was at least 20, 25 feet high. So we're in a feast or famine situation with how weather treats our state. So what I like to address on the committee work I do, one committee I'm on is Transportation and Infrastructure. Why aren't we doing more to store water? If we're becoming into more drought periods and we don't have the same snowpack, when you have rainfall instead of snowpack, you don't have that time release of water sitting up there all June and July, keeping the lakes full. If it's all going to rush down at one time due to higher temperature, then we got to put some more places out to store water so we can store more of it longer into the year, because we're seeing more and more demand on that water supply. We're seeing a tremendous devastation on the amount of ag land being idled in this state. And as a farmer, I have great sympathy for my colleagues, especially the farther south you go, where the bread basket, the fruit and vegetable basket of the world, of this country at least, is right here in our Central Valley. And so why is water being taken away from them when we could be doing something about it? Of course, that also brings up the topic, how much water is being flushed out through the delta into the ocean that we could be instead impounding and saving for use, for beneficial use. Now, you know, we're talking about the delta smelt. Ever since 1992, when a whole bunch of water has been appropriated towards that direction, we haven't seen an improvement in the recovery of that species, okay? That species, the numbers keep going down. They go out and they do a trapping exercise every month or so, during, or whatever it is, and they're finding less, they're getting where they can't find any. And a friend from the Central Valley monitors this on the water use and water loss. What's interesting we should talk about is the amount of sewer and stuff coming out of the cities and ruining the delta.
Congressman, your
There's my time.
time's
Thank
up.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Denney?
Same question?
Yes.
If you don't mind, I'm going to do just a tiny bit of real-time fact-checking. The congressman mentioned that he passed legislation to clear around power lines. Difference between passing and introducing: passing means it becomes a law, or at least passes one chamber. He introduced that legislation. Human-caused climate change already here. Nobody's surprised. We can't grow cherries in Butte County anymore. Fire season's almost year-round. The fires are hotter, more intense, creating their own weather. This part's not a surprise. We know we have a short time, 12 years, to take bold action to keep the global temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius change. The president's own FEC appointee, Allison Lee, told us that it is not just an environmental issue, right? This is an economic issue. She said that the global economy will be in crisis with climate change, and it will touch every corner of the world, from food to water to healthcare to poverty, right? in our part of the world, we became the face of the climate crisis over the last 2 years when we've had some of the most deadly wildfires. And folks, we can be the face of the solution if we take bold action quickly. Bold action that helps us turn the dial back on climate change. We're talking about getting our forests into a state of health so they become carbon sinks instead of carbon sources. We're talking about ag policy that trains and equips farmers and ranchers to use carbon sequestering policies to turn back the dial. But any politician who tells you that this is emissions only work that needs to be done, for example, ridiculous propositions to require everyone drive electric cars, they're missing the whole point, right? The car fire and the campfire emitted 9 times as many carbon GHG emissions in 2018 as the state of California was able to reduce our emissions by that year. And a lot of other things need to happen, but every dollar of greenhouse gas reduction funds need to go into forest management.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Denney, you go first on this question. Do you think we must take immediate action to combat climate change directly? And if so, please identify 3 specific actions we should take now to reduce CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. I will say the rest of what I wanted to say in my last question. We absolutely need to take immediate action. Even if the United States today stopped using any fossil fuel emissions or creating any GHG emissions, the world would still be completely screwed. We'd be screwed. The United States only emits 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and it is time that we stop our America First isolationist mentality and reclaim our role of leadership on the global stage and work with countries that are the biggest polluters, like China and like India, so we can secure our global future, right? Besides that international action, I started to list off in my last answer some policies that I cannot wait to help get into the Farm Bill. The congressman likes to say that I support the Green New Deal and that makes me a crazy lefty, but what the Green New Deal is it's a non-binding House resolution that in next Congress will have policies set up under it to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and store carbon. And we can either elect someone who won't even be asked to be at that table, or we can elect someone who will make sure forest health and ag policy is funded. Folks, whether you like it or not, more environmental regulations and policies are coming down the pipe, and we need a leader who will be invited to sit at that table, who will advocate for you, who's also not bought and paid for by the oil and gas industry, like Exxon and Chevron. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Congressman?
Restate again, please.
Yes. Do you think we must take immediate action to combat climate change directly? And if so, please identify 3 specific actions we should take now to reduce CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, first of all, we could, the United States has already been a leader in reducing CO2 without having to be under the boot heel of the Paris Accord that the president got us out of. We're the only country until very recently to see our carbon dioxide numbers go down. Now, this is playing along with the concept that 0.04% of our atmosphere being CO2 is the giant problem that people are making it out to be. So what we're talking about in other types of emissions, we're working hard on that. Diesel emissions, better running trucks and trains and all that sort of thing, better running automobiles. The internal combustion engine is doing amazing things. And so the bans that are coming down the pike from the Democrat governor of this state, and especially in light of a power grid that can barely keep up with what we have right now, and in that they're taking a second nuclear power plant offline, San Luis Obispo, the Diablo Canyon, this on top of the San Onofre down in San Diego, which combined are somewhere between 14 and 60% of our power grid, 14 to 16, just those 2 plants. They're trying to tear out hydroelectric dams up in the north part of my district with dubious benefit. And so we're taking out all these forms of power, yet the grid is going to be required by this governor and by those plenty in the legislature lined up to do it, to require us to have electric cars by 2035 and a grid that's already overloaded and continues to be downsized. They want to take more gas-fired plants offline. The governor did us a favor and let them stay on during the last energy crunch. So if you want to do something about the mess we have with CO2 emissions, it comes back to the huge amount that's emitted by these out-of-control forest fires, which would be much more controllable if we did the type of thinning, management, the areas that we need to be have less material, backfires, whatever it takes to control the CO2 coming from that, and that would be a giant step forward.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to pivot to some questions about coronavirus. And Congressman LaMalfa, you go first in this question. Okay, according to CDC, social distancing and wearing masks are the primary weapons to limit COVID-19 transmission and deaths and reduce the economic impacts of the pandemic. When I look around locally, and remember this question has been submitted by a constituent. When I look around locally, only about 50% of the folks are practicing these behaviors. What is your position on these measures?
Well, what has been the problem with this from the beginning, from the initiation of this pandemic, is that lack of information, all right? So in the immediate, on January 31, I think it was, before there was more than a handful of infections in this country, the president took action to stop more people from coming in from areas that had the infections. So that was the first strike to try and do something about it. At that point, we had to tool up to produce the masks, the other equipment, even the ventilators. So you saw the car manufacturers and others come up to build the ventilators at the rate that they thought were needed. Turns out that maybe ventilators aren't the answer for people that have the infection. That remains to be debated. But the problem with so much around the coronavirus is the misinformation out there. So you can have 3 different opinions on just from CDC in the last recent time about is the virus spread by breath, by aerosol. They've said no, then yes, now it's no again. What are we getting out of the WHO? So I think what it really comes down to is individuals have got to figure out what their level of risk is. For those the highest prone, they needed to take the greatest measures to reduce their risk. Let others go shopping for you. But we still have people that need to do essential things for us. My farm can't stop producing rice and be part of the whole solution for world food, as well as all the other things that were deemed by somebody as essential. Now, at the end of the day, if there's a job, if there's a product, if there's something being produced that people need, I guess they're all essential, aren't they? So we need to continue to find ways to ensure the public safety on this. For those most vulnerable, we need to take the greatest steps and encourage them to do that. For others, they need to find their own path on that to say what is the true risk. But the sad thing of all this is there hasn't been much truth getting out there on what really that remedy completely is.
Thank you. Ms. Denney?
I'm really glad that the congressman brought up the lack of information, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, which President Trump has publicly stated that he downplayed the pandemic, right? Everyone's goal is to save lives and to open our local economies as quickly as possible, right? And to do that, we have to follow the guidance of our local county health officials. Wear masks, wash your hands like crazy, don't be around other people, 6 feet away all the time. The science is there, right? Shasta County right now has the highest positivity rate of any county in the nation, 8.1%. Tehama right behind it at 8%. And folks, Shasta County has, like it or not, has been the epicenter of the anti-mask movement for months, right? And the Shasta County public health officer just said that most of their recent cases are from young people who were associated with the Bethel School of Supernatural Wada Wada, right? And so it's absolutely critical that we follow the guidelines of our local health officials to open our economy as soon as can. Unfortunately, in this part of the world, we have a congressman who doesn't wear masks when he goes to veterans events, attends anti-mask rallies, and called COVID BS on his personal Facebook page. I think that's unacceptable. We need a leader who will take this seriously, who will always encourage others to do the right thing. And the thought of each person finding their own choices in this is an incredibly selfish thing to say. Every single person needs to be wearing a mask, whether you are at risk or not, to be able to protect the most vulnerable in our society, full stop, period. Wear your damn mask. Next.
Okay.
Another COVID one?
So we have one more COVID question. Okay, one of our district constituents asks, as a citizen of this community, I am very disturbed by people who do not follow guidelines designed to protect the health of my family and everyone else in public places. Businesses that we support are failing to monitor and encourage compliance with their own safety rules. Should individuals and businesses be held accountable when they violate safety protocols? If not, how should people of our community be protected?
Yeah.
And Ms. Denney, you go first.
I go first, yeah. So our local businesses are already being monitored and held to account. Could we do this a little bit better? Yeah, we certainly could, but in some cases, the penalty for not adhering to the requirements are less money than those businesses would make in a day being open, right? So we really need to look at that. In terms of giving everybody a $5 fine who's not wearing a mask, that's ridiculous. Like, that can't be enforced. But what we need to do is we need to remind our neighbors of our moral authority and our moral desire as a country to protect people and to protect health and safety. And it could not be more important. By January, we're expecting to see 400,000 deaths in our country. We have a higher death rate than any other developed nation. And it's because we've decided to make this a political issue and not a science issue, right? Politics has no room at the table in a global pandemic, and we have to work together to protect each other.
Okay, thank you. Congressman LaMalfa?
The sad thing, it has been made into too much of a political issue. We see a difference between states, whether they're red or blue states, on how they're administering their lockdowns or not lockdowns. You know, just today, I think it was, the WHO has come out and said lockdowns are bad. So again, we have a lack of straight information because different sides are manipulating the statistics and the numbers. You know, when you have a situation where groups can make money off of categorizing something as a COVID infection or a COVID death perhaps, then you're going to get a skewed situation. But I'd hearken back to the beginning where before any action was taken, there was the projection that there'd be 2 million deaths in the United States, and the number is now 200,000. And so I don't just look at these as simple statistics. These are all losses of life, and someone's family is very, harmed and hurt by this. But in terms of a success ratio, with having 1/10 of the number of deaths as originally projected by CDC, I guess there must be some level of success in this. So we have to continue to strive for that. As far as businesses, when you see that like salons and barbershops that can separate and still they're shut down because of the orders by somebody coming from Sacramento or somewhere else, unreasonableness in the way these regulations are put out. That's what's starting to make people angry. It's making them furious because simple things aren't happening, yet Mrs. Pelosi or Mr. Newsom seems to be able to get haircuts when they want to. So it has to be a lot more equitable than it is. It has to be more sensible than it is. When you see an order coming out of the governor's office says, put your mask on if you're out eating between every bite, I mean, that's just a germ haven happening right there, touching it that many times. So, so for regular folks out there, for people whose small business, they have loans, they have dreams that are on the line that are going to be killed off because of arbitrariness that isn't really necessarily tied to something happening in their business, but maybe something happening on the other side of the county is not fair.
Okay, thank you. And Congressman LaMalfa, one more COVID-19 question here. What should be the role of the federal government in responding to a pandemic such as COVID-19? And have you been satisfied with the federal response?
You know, it can always be better because there's flaws in, you know, how soon we could get the funding going on that, and there's been battles over the legislation back there. Thankfully, we've had 3 positive pieces of legislation that I voted for. Now, my opponent likes to claim falsely that I have not supported COVID relief and help for people's health as well as the businesses across this country. There's 3 different pieces of legislation totaling approximately $3 trillion. Now, the word trillion is not a number we should just get very comfortable with throwing around a lot. So we'd have to have some eye on fiscal responsibility. And this is what I was talking about in previous press about, you know, it would be very good if we went through a committee process and discussed what it is we're putting on the table when we're talking $3 trillion over time. So we had pretty decent legislation come out of this. It's got plenty of flaws. You know, I wasn't happy with how quickly some of the loans were getting out to businesses there, but we slogged through it and worked through it. So going forward, we have to learn what we have all learned together, and that's Republicans, Democrats, everybody, on how we're going to continue to do this better because, you know, our national debt is growing huger and huger too on top of all this. But we saw an emergency. We took action, and I think we've been able to blunt a lot of it, especially given original CDC predictions of 2 million deaths in this country. So if we could put the partisan and political nonsense aside and say, what are the solutions, we'd get a lot farther through this, you know, such as, again, legislation that I did pass with Mr. Schrader on cleaning around power lines and legislation going forward to do better at that. If we can have more bipartisan legislation without the get you stuff because it's 2020 election year, we'd be much better off on all this. So for the next round, I hope we can get a decent bill that comes from the U.S. Senate that we can agree on, not something way over the top like the HEROES Act that Mrs. Pelosi's pushing.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Denney.
Same question.
Same question, please.
I love getting to listen to the congressman talk about fiscal responsibility. The reason I jumped into this race in 2017 was because he pushed through a $1.5 trillion tax cut, 83% going to corporations and the richest among us, which added $1.5 trillion to our debt. Would be super handy to have that $1.5 trillion right now to pay for some of this stuff. Also, working on our bipartisan politics, maybe let's not blame Nancy Pelosi's haircut on the problem. Anyway, aside from that, March 27th was the last bill that the congressman voted on. Yay, got the CARES Act through. Guess what? In the HEROES Act, which he voted no for in May and on October 1st, this fixed a lot of the problems in the CARES Act. It fixed making sure corporations don't take money meant for small businesses. Yeah, am I concerned about a $3 billion, now a $2.2 billion deficit? Absolutely I am. But the truth is, that bill would have put tools into the hands of our local leaders and community members immediately. He voted against a bill that would have provided $500 million of SAFER grants, those fire emergency response grants, $500 million of assistance to firefighter grants. It would have provided emergency relief, bailout money to livestock producers at the tune of $128 a head, and he voted against it. And now ranchers, fourth-generation ranchers in Modoc County are having to sell off 3/4 of their herds, right? That bill had grants for rural hospitals and medically underserved areas. It had money for school lunches. It literally voted no for giving kids food. Was it perfect? No. Was there stuff in there that I didn't agree with that was too partisan? Absolutely. But we needed it.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to pivot towards healthcare. Have a couple questions on healthcare. Ms. Denney, you go first on this one. Americans are concerned about their ability to access affordable health care. This concern has intensified during the current pandemic, during which millions of Americans have lost their health insurance along with their jobs. Please describe the health care plan that you support and specify the 4 or 5 main features of that plan.
Cool. No surprise that the healthcare system in our country is broken, right? It's designed to provide profits to insurance companies and pharmaceutical CEOs. We rank at the bottom of health outcomes in developed countries, and yet we pay the most. We're talking $10,200 annually per person is spent on healthcare, 17% of the GDP, but we have the least doctors, the lowest life expectancy, and the highest rate of preventable deaths. We're not getting our money's worth, folks. The COVID crisis has shown me one thing pretty clearly, and it's tying our health insurance to our employment status is a pretty terrible idea, right? We need to be working towards a system that has truly universal, truly affordable health care. That starts with protecting what we have now and trying to expand it, right? 50% of our district is on government-sponsored, 48% government-sponsored health care, Medicare, Medicaid, ACA. The congressman has voted 35 times to remove pre-existing protections for folks from the ACA or in other bills. He's voted to repeal and replace the ACA with anything. Does the ACA have problems? Absolutely. We are still paying way too much because the insurance markets are constantly being undermined by Republican leadership. We have a lot to focus on in rural healthcare, which honestly, my 2 years as a freshman rep in Congress, I'm not going to be able to single-handedly restructure 1/6 of the American economy, but I will be able to focus on rural healthcare priorities in our part of the world, funding for federally qualified healthcare centers, addressing the health professional shortage area through programs like the National Health Service Corps, and many others.
Thank you. Congressman?
Well, the Affordable Care Act is not what its name implies. It's been a disaster ever since it's been put in for people that pay for it. Now, for those that are to receive the help on that, they're not as enrolled as was advertised either. So what the focus should have been is having people that were happy with their health care plan be left alone on that and find ways to improve how health care is delivered, and mostly what is the cost problem, because we have an amazing healthcare system in this country, amazing doctors, amazing innovation. The pharmaceuticals that are developed that are life-saving, that do amazing things to help people with blood pressure and heart issues and who knows what else. Many things are developed in this country, not in socialist countries, but because we have the ability to innovate and invent in this country. So what is the issue? Helping those that really needed the help to begin with, not screwing up everybody else's health insurance that they happen to like. The lie that Obamacare was. So what do? Well, Republicans do put forth plans that do cover pre-existing conditions. We have one that was from several years ago. It's been updated, that the president has also put out to update and help with pre-existing conditions. Put these folks in the high-risk pool. Put these folks in the direct need, that are in the direct need in their own pool, and not mess it up for everybody else who is, by and large, reasonably happy with what they had, as long as they can afford it. When you see people's costs skyrocketing, someone told me just the other day, my cost used to be about $130 a month, now it's about $1,200 a month. Well, how did that help them? It didn't. So the issue with our healthcare system isn't so much that it isn't pretty good, it's very good. Why do people come to this country to have life-saving procedures done? It's how we deliver it and how we pay for it. And so we have to have a much more focused approach on helping those folks that are indigent, helping those folks that need it, and not messing it up for everybody else. And that's what Republican plans have if we can get the votes from the Democrats in the Senate.
Okay, thank you. So another question on healthcare, and Congressman LaMalfa, you go first. The Affordable Care Act is my family's only option for affordable health care, with several consumer protections, including protections for pre-existing conditions. If the ACA is struck down, what is your plan for guaranteeing my family affordable health care with the consumer protections of the Affordable Care Act?
Right. Okay. The model we're seeing with the ACA has not worked for those that are paying for it. They're seeing higher and higher costs. And when we're talking basically taxpayers, they're the ones that have to carry the load for those that aren't able to participate in paying for it. So the focus has to be, once again, on developing as Republicans have planned. In the American Health Care Reform Act, what the president's working on right now, the focus, the billions that will be required to focus on those with the pre-existing conditions. No one wants to take this away. Now, this is all hyped in the media as that. It's hyped by the Democrats as that. But we have plans for that, to put that in place. And so if people are currently in that need, we want to have them be able to utilize that while they need it, but then have a bridge to get out of that so they can buy their own affordable insurance. And that's where insurance plan portability would be very important, if you can take it from job to job and also buy across state lines. Why we have this ridiculous requirement that you can't buy for any competitive plan that's offered across the country that fits you, that fits your family. It gives you the freedom to choose one for you instead of the government saying, well, you fit either the bronze plan or the silver plan or the gold plan as put down by someone's interpretation of what it is you need. So we'll be much more successful getting back to a focused approach on those that need the help. And that's what we want people to have. So it's, a lot of hype gets put out about Republicans taking it away. We have plans to replace it. So, we just need to have the will to have something that works for everybody instead of putting the government and more in charge of basically 1/6, 1/7 of our economy when the government can't manage what it has.
Thank you. Ms. Denney?
I think in the last 2 minutes I put together why the congressman thinks our healthcare system is good. And that's probably because he has fantastic government-sponsored, taxpayer-paid-for healthcare. I got a concussion on a backpacking trip with my sisters. I waited 10 days to go to the emergency room a couple months ago because I didn't want to pay for the doctor's bill. Finally, I was losing consciousness while making fundraising calls, and my finance director drove me to the hospital. I was there for 2 hours. I got a CAT scan. It cost $25,000. Doesn't seem like a good healthcare system. The argument that GOP leadership is not trying to strike down the ACA is ludicrous. There is a court case, a Supreme Court case on the books on November 10th to do that exact same thing. Senators that are currently picking the next Supreme Court justice have signed on to that Supreme Court case. The corruption and the irony that is in the situation is literally mind-blowing for me. The ACA is not great. The reason it's not great is because we keep undermining our insurance markets. If we have less insurers in an area, there's less competition. Basic rules of capitalism. The GOP continues to undermine insurance markets. Nobody got kicked off their health care with the ACA. If you had work-sponsored health care, you get it. What it did was make sure 10 essential benefits were covered in your health care. Like, I don't know, having a baby. Sorry I'm getting a little sassy. Last thing I need to say, putting people in a high-risk pool that need the most help raises the premiums on the oldest and the most vulnerable and the most sickly among us, right? And so we already have elderly people who are trying to choose between healthcare, medicine, and food, and that's unacceptable.
Thank you. Okay, we're now going to turn our attention to economy and jobs. Ms. Denney, you go first.
Fantastic.
What will you do to promote a vibrant economy and increase job opportunities in District 1?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a topic that I can speak about more calmly for those of you at home. The economy in our part of the world has been tanking since long before the COVID pandemic hit, right? We're currently at 8% unemployment. A lot of the decline has to do with in the late 80s and early 90s when the feds stopped letting us take green timber out of federal forests, right? The congressman mentioned that earlier, all part of the Northwest Forest Plan dealing with the spotted owl, right? That was a bad move based on bad science and has led us continually to a place where we have these overgrown forests. We need to increase our career and technical education at our community colleges and make sure that that is responsive to industry demand, right? Shasta College can't get folks through their program fast enough who know how to drive log skidders. We definitely need a qualified labor force to be able to do all of this forest work, whether we do it through a conservation stewardship agreement or through the Great American Outdoors Act, right? Tremendous amount of opportunity there. Tremendous amount of opportunity in building new markets for the biomass that we pull off those forests, right? We mentioned them earlier. Wood pellets, cross-laminated timber, biofuels, biomass plants, but we have to make the private industry trust the federal government enough that they're gonna have a steady supply of biomass long into the future. Because honestly, guys, private industry in our part of the world has been burned by the feds and they don't trust them for good reason, right? Besides forestry, CTE, our district, out of 435 congressional districts, has this, only 7 districts have worse rural broadband than us, right? Rural broadband will attract businesses to come. It'll allow young people like myself to work gig jobs, and it'll give us the flexibility that we need, especially in times of a pandemic. So those are some base issues that I really, really want to focus on in my first 2 years.
Thank you. Congressman LaMalfa?
Restate the question, please.
Yes. What will you do to promote a vibrant economy and increase job opportunities in our district?
Yeah, thank you. Well, we were very successful nationally at that up until when the virus hit. We had the strongest economy we'd seen since 1969. Unemployment was as low for all types of people, for Latinos, for blacks, for everyone, as it had ever been. So what had been going on through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and 15 different congressional review acts, realigning regulations to be more in line with bringing jobs back to this country and investment back to this country, and engendering a confidence that factories, that manufacturing could be in this country. And so it was all poo-pooed, saying, oh, that's not going to happen. Well, it was all happening pretty well. Now, the virus is a curveball that nobody could hit. So at this point, we've been devastated for the first few months of the year on that. But we've seen a bounce back in a lot of those jobs. Millions of jobs have recovered during that time. Now, we have a long ways to go to get back anywhere close to where we were. So what do we need to do here in this district? This district is a very rural, very agricultural dependent, timber, mining, all those things that come from the ground. And so we also happen to be in the most highly regulated state, or at least one of them, the state of California, where doing any kind of mining, doing any kind of timber. And I passed legislation at the state level to make timber harvest a little bit easier in the permit process. That's been built upon. So it just shows that the level of regulation that is unreasonable, that doesn't help the environment, it doesn't help workers at the end of the day, has hurt us greatly in this first district. And so we're battling to try and get these opportunities back. You know, rural broadband, we're pushing farther and farther into our rural areas with the USDA rural development grants that came as a result of the Farm Bill, which I voted for. So it's helpful to have our same opportunities in this part of the state as they do in urban areas
So,
with these communications.
I'm glad you're talking about broadband, because that leads us to our next question.
Okay.
If our communities are to be part of the modern California economy, we need better broadband coverage in District 1. The substandard quality makes it next to impossible to run our business from home. What do you plan to do to bring quality broadband to the district's rural areas?
Okay.
This affects education as well.
Yeah, thank you. It has a lot of positive effects on education. It helps our junior colleges to be more hooked up and more competitive as well with all the types of opportunities we have at especially our far reach areas, Feather River and Lassen and Siskiyou and such, to have those kinds of hookups, as well as telemedicine, extremely important. So when you can go up to the hospital in Alturas or Cedarville and have the ability to take a scan, to have a test done and send those results down to where the experts are, that they couldn't possibly keep that widespread in the rural area, that's a better service to the people locally, especially in an emergency, or at least helping get someone in a situation stabilize and know what they need to do if they do have to go to a larger urban hospital. So rural broadband is something that we were able to accomplish incrementally improvement in the Farm Bill. I was with Secretary Perdue when we announced the ability to push more of these rural development grants out on that. So it's a matter, so far it's been a matter of economics. The people that are the purveyors of these types of communications are going to the largest markets and not much beyond that. So the grants and the legislation we've been able to push through incentivizes them and helps them to take it farther into the far reaches of a very rural district like ours. So it's something we're constantly working upon and building upon because it's extremely important for the education opportunities, for the job opportunities. The more we can have businesses, whether it's light manufacturing or what have you, be able to have these hookups, the more that they can be right in the same marketplace with everybody else. And the more attractive it is to get more industry to come to our areas and develop in our enterprise zones that we have available around our airport areas and different areas in our counties up and down the district that would accept more and more work and more of these transplants. I mean, wouldn't it be great to get more silicon chips instead of in high-cost areas for people that can't even afford to live there in the Bay Area? Bring some of that stuff up our way where the living is great and the costs are low. We could do this.
Thank you. Ms. Denney.
I'm not going to belabor the point talking about why we need rural broadband. Congressman did a great job. I agree with everything he said. Quick example, Modoc County School District, 2.9% of the families that are in that school district have access to broadband at a rate where their kids can do homework at home. 2.9%. That means the rest of the kids are sitting in the high school parking lot after hours to connect to Wi-Fi to do their homework. It's unacceptable. The USDA, the Farm Bill, love the Farm Bill. The USDA Rural Development Program put some grants in place, great place to start. This is an urgent issue, and for me, it's kind of too little too late, right? It's gonna take big, bold action. We have to first start to work with the biggest players, Verizon, Comcast, and the like, to do two things, right? To either A, get them to provide future-ready service to all Americans, including the 30% of rural households who don't have access to broadband, but they don't want to do it, right? It costs way more money. There's no profit in bringing broadband to all tourists, right? And so if we can't force them to do it, then we need to make sure that they're not blocking smaller providers or municipalities from building their own network. Harder to hold them accountable when you're taking campaign contributions from Verizon and Comcast PACs. Next, think back, 1936, Rural Electrification Act. It was a utility, everyone had a right to it. The federal government made bold strides to bring electricity to everyone. Did it take a little while? Yeah, but it made it happen because it was a utility. We have to regulate the internet as a utility. It's not right now. Right? If we regulate it as a utility, everyone gets access to it, and we can have big, bold programs to make sure that we don't fall behind with the digital divide.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Denney, you answer this question first. What are the biggest challenges faced by farmers and ranchers in our district, and how would you address these challenges?
Cool. Awesome. The 3, trade, labor, not enough funding for conservation. That's my own pet one. Trade first, we know how badly the president's trade war affected our counties. Butte County alone had $188 million almond crop in 2017-18 that got messed up by it, right? The congressman has a TV ad out right now that has a story of a local farm family, and the congressman helped him after the trade war. I watched that ad, and honestly, to me, it felt a little bit like a drunk driver plowing over a family and then calling 911 and claiming that he's the hero, right? The congressman has been complicit with the president on these trade wars. He's voted in line with him 94% of the time. Farmers want trade. We don't want aid, right? The ag industry bankruptcies are set to go up exponentially this year, and small farmers are receiving the brunt of it. Ag labor. The congressman signed on to a bipartisan ag labor bill this year, and I'm super, super proud of him for that. It was the right thing to do. We desperately need to either get worker visas back in, we need to get H-2A visas back up, we need to make sure that we're able to have enough labor that our immigrant labor isn't being attracted by the higher wages in the construction industry, right? Labor makes up 10% of the cost for farmers and 17% for specialty farmers, right? A guy that I know farms on the west side of the valley, Central Valley, he had to change commodities from less labor-intensive crops because the amount of paperwork it was gonna have to do to get them done. I'm done, more later. Carry on.
Thank you. Congressman?
Well, the challenges farmers face, some of them are the ones they've always faced, and some of them are newer and more unique. So I would list quickly water, labor, regulation, cost of doing business. Now, in my travels around the country, for example, let's talk about fuel for just a moment. Fuel in California is approximately double at the pump what you'll see in other states back east, in the Midwest, etc. So our cost just there alone is much higher. Labor, we've been talking with our friends at Farm Bureau and said, we got to do something about this labor situation, And so our work on that bipartisan legislation, which me and my team are right in the middle of and working great with Zoe Lofgren from the Bay Area. We don't always see eye to eye on a lot of issues, but we had a great working relationship on this labor bill. And this would provide that we get a legal labor force, which is better for the worker, better for the farmer, more stability for all of them, and certainly is in keeping with the immigration law, which it's all win-win-win. We were able to pass that through the House. It's waiting over in the Senate. There's those that want to denigrate it for certain reasons, but I think it was a great, bold step forward in the whole issue of ag labor, and a lot of people are very pleased with that. So we will take that up. If it doesn't somehow get through the end of this year, I intend for us to jump right back at it in the new year. So water supply, always an issue for us in California. We have so much of it washing out through the delta that is doing no good environmentally for the smelt, for much of anything else. Billions and billions of gallons of water. We should be filling San Luis Reservoir at every opportunity. We need to be building Sites Reservoir on the west side of the Sacramento Valley. If it comes to fruition, the raise of the Shasta Dam will provide 620,000 new acre feet on the years that it fills. I mean, that helps add so much to the water supply that is already highly competitive for many other uses, environmental, urban, and ag.
Congressman, here's
you.
a question on water, so perfect segue. And you answer first. How do we provide for our region's water resource needs while minimizing the environmental damage or infringing further on our indigenous people's sacred territories? What role does conservation play in your plans?
Conservation plays an important role, and indeed the way we're able to, the innovation we're seeing, the way certain crops are grown, and in orchards and in field crops with the emitters, with water systems that are not what they used to be. So we, even in rice, for example, we're using our technology to level our fields to a precision level that uses less water than it has in the past, because we can basically make a field almost perfectly flat and helping with our weed control using less chemicals, etc. But at the end of the day, we still have to have a water supply to conserve to begin with. And that means adding to our water storage for a growing population, growing demand, growing needs. And so we're losing out on opportunities by storing water with possible projects we could be doing. And that includes Sites Reservoir. Again, when I was out there on an early tour a few years ago, a biologist there said, if we can't build it here, we can't build one anywhere environmentally, because basically there's not a species problem out there. So that's, and the landowners out there are willing participants in having that become a lake. And that'll be potentially 1.3 million acre feet of water available for all sorts of purposes. The way the state bond is structured, half of that would go for environmental purposes, okay, and half of it could go for those that are investing in it to use for ag or even as the bids are opened up, other purposes farther south. So it inures to all of us to have more supply, as well as a possible raise of Shasta. And I don't think we should even take Auburn Dam completely off the table because of the potential it provides for a great amount of flood control and a great amount of storage up there. So we're going to need this water, and we keep taking it from the people that produce and giving it to dubious uses like flushing it out to the Pacific Ocean through the Delta. And that just, it isn't going to work for us to have an economy, to have food grown, and the greatest bread and fruit basket in the country right here in California.
Thank you.
Water
Ms. Denney?
conservation?
Yep.
I'm going to take the liberty to also talk about storage, and then we'll get to water conservation. Congressman and I agree completely on sites. 175 agencies and groups came together to make the plan for that. There are no more good places to build dams. They all got used up in the 1960s. That's kind of the best we've got, and it's off stream, so it's going to allow us to build more flexibility into our water system. Can't wait to get to work with Congressman Garamendi in the 3rd, where Sites is will be living, to make that happen. Shasta Dam, guys. The congressman was almost right when he said how much water it would add. It will add the capacity of Shasta Dam. The 18.5 foot proposed raise will add it 634,000 feet. So, and every year that it fills, which it hasn't once since 1960, you could potentially get that much more water. The calculations show that the water yield, how much increases will actually be delivered, is around 53,000 acre feet. About 0.7% of the Central Valley's project's annual water delivery. They don't have a federal cost share partner anymore because it'll violate state law, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and it's going to get caught up in courts forever. And also it does inundate some really important cultural heritage sites for the Wyndham and Win2. Water conservation, all right, this is where a lot of magic can happen in addition to addressing some of our needs for increased storage. The ag industry, as he's mentioned, is doing an incredible job. Do a lot of work with the Almond Board of California. One of their 2025 sustainability goals decreases almond use, water use even more. We need to be looking at recycling programs. In Modesto, they're taking wastewater and piping it over to Westside farmers to use. But we're missing the boat if we're not talking about land management, right? Getting our forests into a state of health is going to allow the water not to get stuck in the tree lines, not to evaporate, but to make it all the way down to the soil where it will refill our aquifers and streams.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Denney, you go first on this next question. What is your position on federal farm subsidies, and should subsidies be changed?
Yeah, let's go. All right, let's talk about subsidies, folks. When there's a market failure, the government steps in to address that market failure. Agriculture, highest risk business there is out there. So when there's a market failure in an agricultural commodity, the federal government steps in and correct that through crop insurance programs, through risk management programs. Great idea, right? Great idea. Congressman's family, as well publicized, has been able to utilize that program, and as well he should when those markets were in need, right? I get a little confused because the other big market failure is in the healthcare sector, because whether you have money or not, you need healthcare, and so the government steps in to provide some government-sponsored healthcare options. Get confused on why the congressman doesn't like to support those as much. How we should make farm subsidies better. Congressman was on the 2014 Ag Committee that passed the most recent Farm Bill. He did a great job capping our crop insurance payments to not go over market value. That was really key. Unfortunately, we lost some key elements of transparency in that, and so we can't anymore really exactly see who's getting what, which is pretty important. Small farmers, mid-sized farmers have been consistently left behind, and our specialty crop guys out here in California are always left behind, right? We need a real strong voice for California Ag on the Ag Committee. I would love if we could also think about increasing the use of on-farm conservation practices to anybody who's getting ARC or PLC money. Put me on that Ag Committee. I wanna help make farm policy better for farmers and for everybody.
Thank you. Congressman LaMalfa?
Yeah, would you repeat the question, please?
Yes. What is your position on federal farm subsidies, And should subsidies be changed?
Okay. Well, this goes all the way back to the 30s, really, with the Dust Bowl and what was originally called the Ag Stabilization and Conservation Service. You know, stabilizing prices, stabilizing the crops that are grown so that our America's breadbasket continued to operate. Conservation because of the Dust Bowl and the soil that was being lost. So, and the roots of that going all the way back then are what we've had through the years. Now, during my father's time, they were a little bit onerous. He had to actually buy his way into being able to farm his land. He couldn't farm just by stepping in and farming land. He had to buy what was called rice units, for example. Later on came freedom to farm. But I've seen the flaw in this the whole time is that a subsidy deal is not a great way of doing business. I've never known any farmers that are very happy with that situation in the many programs that crops that were in that as it was. You know, many of the grain crops are part of that. So, you know, people like to make a lot of hay out of my family. We're just merely participating the same as any other agriculturist would that's farming a program crop, a grain crop. Indeed, the breadbasket, the staple of America's food sustenance. So, you know, if we're not in it, then we're outside in the dark pretty soon. So that said, when I got to Congress, the first farm bill I was able to vote on was a 2014 one, which at that point ended the direct payment program and shifted farmers over into addressing risk with the farm insurance program. And so that has worked pretty darn well and has been able to fill in the gaps when there is a price disaster or a crop disaster in this country. Because I think what is really being looked at, why the federal government is involved, is it sees the agricultural products grown in this country strategically as a national requirement for defense, you know, for sustaining our country and not relying on imports.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit here. Congressman LaMalfa, you go first on this question. Do you believe that systemic racism exists in our country? Please share what impacts your beliefs.
No, it does not exist as systemically in this country. Does racism? Are there racist? Of course they are, of all types. And so what is it as a country we're doing to combat that? You know, we're becoming much more aware, but we've always been somewhat aware. The Civil War was fought over slavery. The North was against it. The South was sustaining it. So why in the world is it still a debate today? I think you have to look at partly human nature. People by nature, except for our civilization, our civil way we treat each other, our religion, our upbringings, tend to be lean towards greed, lead towards jealousy, envy, all those things, until we civilize ourselves more so. Racism goes along with that. So what I'm proud of is that it was identified at the founding of this country, but for the country to be founded required compromise, some not great compromise. But by Abraham Lincoln's era, slavery was corrected. And the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments did that, ending slavery, bringing full rights of citizenship, and voting for black men, okay? And these were largely passed by Republicans. Democrats, and go back and check the record, were fighting these things. They were filibustering against them. And so the first 20 black legislators back in those days were Republicans. And so building upon that, the 19th Amendment, giving women finally the right to vote after the turn of the 20th century. That was led by Republicans as well. So when we're talking about systemic racism, we have to take into account that the measures being done keep building over time. And what we have going today, by this racism being whipped and whipped and whipped, by people saying, let's defund the cops, they're defending people of all colors, is really out of joint, really out of line. And we have to take this debate back to something much more reasonable and factual.
Thank you. Ms. Denney.
let's all remember just to head back to our history books and remember Democrats and Republicans over the last 200 and whatever years. Those names have changed a bunch, and we'll remember the Southern Democrats were the ones pushing against the civil rights era's laws. To talk about this conversation, we have to actually first say what systematic racism is, right? Systemic racism. We're hearing it a lot, we're saying a lot, and a lot of folks just don't know what it means. And it means that there are structural issues. So structural, we're talking about issues that are built into our government, built into our society, structural issues that make life harder for certain groups of people depending on the color of their skin, right? Those have data points that we can look at. We can look at the educational divide. We can look at the poverty gap. We can look at standards of housing. We can look at healthcare outcomes for people of different racial communities. We can look at acts of violence against people in different racial communities. And we can look at the voting discrimination and access to voting that's been really systematically tried to be pushed through this year to keep people of color from voting. If you remember anything that I say tonight, I want you to remember that my core belief as a human being is that all humans are inherently equal in worth and in rights and in dignity. And that's founded from my Christian faith perspective, believing that all God's children are equal, and it's founded by my human rights work and training, right? And as your member of Congress, I will work every single day to make sure that every single person has equal access to justice under the law.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Denney, you answer this question first. As the Latino population continues to grow in Northern California and District 1, how do you plan to represent us and our needs? How do you plan to help small Latino businesses?
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but I lived in El Salvador for a year doing development work from 2007 to 2008. So I used to speak really good Spanish. But this week I tried to film a 1-minute video ad of me speaking Spanish, and it took me 8 hours. And on the 0 to white girl scale, I still was at about a 5. So it was pretty bad. But I got to think about the answer to this question. And as your representative, the first thing we're going to look for is making sure that our immigration system reflects the values that immigrants have always brought to our country, right? We're going to try to provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers and for folks who have been living legally in our country, documented or undocumented, who've been living in our country, providing work in our economy, providing culture in our communities, owning businesses. We need to reform our immigration system to make sure that the Latino community doesn't have to send their kids to school and be worried about whether or not mom and dad are going to be at school when they come home, right? And that takes reforming our immigration system. The Latino communities have been hit especially hard with the corona crisis. A lot of them are essential workers, and we need to try to guarantee that every single person has access to health care, right? We need to make sure that our minimum wage in California is recognized nationally to make sure that folks can earn a living wage while working only one job. And it will be my honor to get to fight for you, but also to listen and learn from you, right? I don't have your same lived experience, and I will be the kind of representative that comes and listens and asks to try to represent you better.
Thank you. Congressman LaMalfa?
Would you restate that again, please?
Yep. As the Latino population continues to grow in District 1, how do you plan to represent us and our needs? How do you plan to help small Latino businesses?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, we are the land of opportunity and the land of equal opportunity. And so the more we can do to promote that is better for everyone. Now, our Latino community is a very important and rich part of the fiber of Northern California with festivals, with the events, and working right beside them in our business, in so much ag business. And it's not just limited to ag, but they bring a lot to our part of the state and indeed the whole country. You know, immigration that was done like my great-grandparents that came from Sicily at the beginning of the last century. The story isn't all that much different. What we have right now is a problem with the way our border is being administered, and so we're enticing folks to come across. We're leading them into a trap in a way. So that's why I'm so proud of the work we were able to do on the ag labor bill. Bipartisan effort, and got it passed through the House so that people don't have to live in the shadows, don't have to worry about their worker status, and they have ability to build upon that, from ag worker status to a green card type status, and even eventually applying for citizenship if they just follow our rules. That's all that anybody would ever ask. And so the opportunities we have as a country are broadened by people of all walks, including our Latino community, having the same opportunities that those that came before me did. And so with the massive influx of Irish labor years ago and Italian labor and all the different people that have come to this country, this isn't really that much different of a deal. I think we're doing them a better service by allowing to have a better ability for them that want to come here and do labor with a legal status, and we need to keep building upon that. So, but we are indeed the land of opportunity, as we saw with the work with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the Congressional Review Act on regulations. The employment opportunities for them, their unemployment was as low as it ever was in this country, and I think we should all be proud of that.
Okay, thank you. So I lost track of time a little bit, so that was our last question, and now we're on to closing statements, excuse me. And Congressman LaMalfa, you go first, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll have to do a catch-all in this 3 minutes then. So I'm indeed, first of all, honored to have represented this district the way we have. Me and my team work really hard at representing not the government at the people, but the people to the government. And so that means a lot of things, working to have our veterans be able to solve their problems sometimes with an intractable VA. I'm proud of the improvements that have been made in the VA the last few years so that we're getting more and more satisfaction from our veterans in their interactions with that. So, and these are the folks that we should treasure a lot because they put it on the line for us. They were ready to do so. And the least we can do is make sure that their needs, reasonable needs at least, are met when they come back home to us. And so I'm glad we're improving on that. And as well, with the opportunities we have in this district, we got to keep expanding upon them. Part of that is broadband. Part of it is just having a regulatory atmosphere that entices people to come here, a tax atmosphere. And so it's tough to do in California because the stuff coming out of Sacramento is unbelievable sometimes. There's important measures on the ballot that are going to make fighting crime hopefully a little bit easier under Proposition 20. The gig legislation, AB 5, was horrific for people that wanted choices, wanted individual freedom to decide how they wanted to contract. So we're hoping that Prop 22 passes and at least makes a start on that. But that all said, these are election time issues. Going forward from that, our team is here to continue to represent. And typically, I'm the last person out of the room at any kind of, public gathering because I try to talk to everybody. My team talks with everybody. We take what their concerns are back, and we try and get action for them. More times than not, we can. I'm proud of my team there, and that if there's a VA issue, if there's a post office issue, if there's a Social Security issue, I tell people, look, call my office. I have great staff members that work with these agencies and get results, and they do. I get these heartwarming letters back sometimes to say, man, Doug, your people, I've been fighting for a long, long time to try and get my Social Security benefit restored or ironed out or what have you, and just was able to help me. So that's why what you're seeing with currently campaign ads, these are stories about people we're able to help directly. Even right now, where Congress doesn't look very productive and the brickbats back and forth, the partisan nonsense, it's good to see that there's bipartisan or nonpartisan things that can happen in there. So we've taken a strong response towards helping people in our district, especially post-Camp Fire and Car Fire, and now the ones we're currently dealing with. And our relationship we have with the White House and what that means with FEMA, what that means with the Department of Agriculture, all that has been very helpful to help accomplish our goals for our district and our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Denney. 3 minutes, please.
3 minutes. Hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for being engaged in the process enough to spend your evening with the congressman and I. And you know what? You're not hiring me based on my opinions on issues, right? That's not the job of the representative. You're hiring a representative based on their decision-making framework, right? When we look at a problem, how are we going to decide how to solve that? August of 2019, at a forum in Grass Valley, the congressman described his decision-making framework. Quote, "A bill is put in front of me and I have to say yay or nay based on my belief system and how I represent myself." Pretty clear. My decision-making framework. I like to say I'm a professional problem solver for a living. I've been working full-time up until last week at an amazing job. And I've built a pretty solid decision-making framework at that job. We decide what the problem is, right? We look at all the root causes. We look at all the contributing factors that got that problem to where it is. We listen to every single different stakeholder who could have any impact, be impacted by or impact on said problem, right? And then we develop a solution that does the most good for the most people who live in California's 1st District. You gotta pressure test that solution through a sustainability lens, right? Socially, economically, environmentally, make sure it checks those boxes, and then you let it out into the world. But then the key part is you have to do monitoring and evaluation of every single solution that you put into the world, right? We've gotta take data, we've gotta see if it's working, and if it's not, we go back to the drawing board to see what will actually meet our outcomes. That's what I bring. That's what I bring to the table. I won't take a dime of corporate PAC money. My average contribution size this cycle is $47. The vast majority of it is coming from you guys right here in this district. And I'm humbled and I'm grateful for your belief in me. As we get down to this kind of end of what has been a crazy 3 years in my personal life, I keep thinking back to one of my favorite Martin Luther King quotes, which is, "The most persistent question of our lives is what can we do for others?" Folks, as we live out this time in American history of historic division and uncertainty, the thing that we can do for the others, the thing that we can do for our democracy to bring us back from the edges of polarization that are terrifying and eroding our democracy, the thing that we can do for others is, regardless of their belief system, treat them like humans.
Okay. That concludes our forum. I'd like to thank the candidates so much for participating, all of the constituents who submitted questions, the crew at Nevada County Media, and to everyone who's watching. For more information on this election and the League of Women Voters, please visit the League of Women Voters website in your county. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.